thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I want to first acknowledge the incredible leadership of Senator Whitehouse, who has not only been a champion on this issue of disclosure and transparency, but has actually written a book about the corporate influence in our country over government. So I want to salute him and thank him for being here and for being such a great partner. I'm also proud to welcome Tiffany Muller, who is the President and Executive Director of End Citizens United, who you'll hear from in a moment, who is leading this effort across the country. Welcome to Linda Finney, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. Pam Laurier from the Rhode Island Chapter of Moms Demand Action. Jonathan Barrard from Clean Water Action. And of course, really delighted to be with Mayor Lombardi, who's hosting us in this beautiful facility and welcoming us here. Thank you, Mayor. And finally, I'm particularly delighted to welcome my colleague, Congressman Jordan Sarbanes, from the great state of Maryland, who chairs the House Democracy Reform Task Force, for taking time out of his schedule to be with us today to participate. And I just want to note that Congressman Sarbanes has been working on this issue for a very long time. In fact, when he began this effort in the House, he was virtually alone and stayed with it persistently for many, many years, and finally really was the leader in convincing the House to make this issue the #1 issue in the midterm elections, to get the corrupting influence of money out of our political system, and to get the government working for the people of this country again. And I just want to salute and thank John for his leadership. This pamphlet, which really speaks about what the Democrats have been able to achieve in the first 200 days in the House majority. But this really important issue, which is really at the center of our reform effort, is to get government responding to the needs of the American people rather than to the needs of special interests of big corporations. We have seen for far too long the American people have suffered from a myriad of crises and epidemics that have swept across our country. From the opioid crisis that continues to wreak havoc in our communities, to the gun violence epidemic that is killing children when they go to school, men and women who are suddenly going to worship, and parents who are trying to go back to school shopping with their kids. We've been forced to watch from the sidelines under Republican leadership as elected officials offer thoughts and prayers, and then wait for the news cycle to change so they don't have to take action. Industries like Big Pharma and the gun lobby have used every tool they have to gain power in Washington, and the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United opened the gates for more corporate and dark money to flood our political system. In 2016, the NRA spent more than $30 million to help get the president elected. They spent another $24 million on other candidates that they thought would prevent us from making any progress on fighting back against gun violence. And we're seeing that pay off right now. Just 2 days ago, the president had a call with the NRA's president to explain he had lost interest in requiring the reversal of background checks, the bare minimum that we could do as elected officials to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And something, by the way, which is supported by over 90% of the American people. This comes after a Republican memo was leaked detailing how Republican members of Congress should respond to calls for action on guns in the wake of mass shootings. Instead of doing literally anything to stop the violence, they offer thoughts and prayers, they condemn the shooter, and then they blame the left. But the pharmaceutical companies are just as bad. As calls for action to stop the opioid crisis continue to reach record highs, the pharmaceutical industry spent $280 million lobbying elected officials in 2018 alone. But it's time for that to change. As all of you know, Democrats took the House back in historic fashion in November because candidates all across the country promised to get to Washington and get to working for the people again by doing 3 things. By driving down the soaring costs of prescription drugs and healthcare broadly, by protecting coverage for pre-existing conditions, by raising the wages of hardworking men and women around our country, by closing the gender gap in wages, by raising the minimum wage and making bold investments in rebuilding our nation's infrastructure. And finally, by cleaning up corruption in Washington, by getting dark money and corporate money out of our political system and slamming shut the revolving door between public and private sectors. Since we took office in January, the House has executed on each of these proposals. We passed legislation to strengthen protections for over 100 million Americans, including 500,000 Rhode Islanders with pre-existing conditions. And we voted to go to court to fight back against the Trump administration's lawsuit to destroy the Affordable Care Act. We passed the Paycheck Fairness Act to ensure equal pay for equal work, and we voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We voted to invest $70 billion in innovative, job-creating infrastructure improvements that will give states like Rhode Island an even better opportunity to compete for federal funding. We passed the most comprehensive anti-corruption legislation undertaken by Congress since Watergate, H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which was authored by Congressman John Sarbanes, to end the corrupting influence of corporate spending in political campaigns and to empower the American voter. H.R. 1 was the product of years of work by Congressman Sarbanes and members of the House Democracy Reform Task Force, which I'm proud to serve on. And as you'll see in the handout which you have at your seat, the For the People Act takes power away from the special interests and gives it back to the American people by finally putting an end to partisan gerrymandering and increasing voter access to the ballot box by requiring automatic voter registration, something I've advocated for since I got elected. It strengthens our democracy by providing resources to update and secure our voting systems. H.R. 1 also includes the Disclose Act, which was authored by Senator Whitehouse, and I introduced in the House to shine a light on dark money by requiring organizations that spend money in our elections to disclose their donors. It also provides additional resources to the FEC to strengthen its enforcement of campaign finance laws and punish those who are caught breaking rules. And it closes loopholes that allow lobbyists to exploit our political system for special interests, and expands conflicts of interest laws for members of Congress by prohibiting them from sitting on corporate boards and increasing the cooling off period before they can become lobbyists. This is a really important piece of legislation. We assigned it H.R. 1 because it was the #1 priority of the House Democrats to break this connection between money and politics. And that bill sits in the United States Senate on Mitch McConnell's desk, and Mitch McConnell refuses to even bring it up for a vote, despite the fact that it's overwhelmingly supported by the American people. This common sense package of anti-corruption reforms is the only piece of legislation to come through the House without a single Republican vote. It's time to clean up our government, to clean up the halls of Congress, and we are here to make sure that that happens. Thank you to everyone who's been part of this effort. It is a tremendous honor for me to introduce the person who has really led this effort in the Congress and in the country, my friend and colleague, extraordinary John Sarbanes.